No drink has influenced American history quite like whiskey. Though its roots lie in Ireland and Scotland, whiskey has become quintessentially American. Today, all 50 states boast at least one of the more than 2,000 distilleries that crisscross the nation. But it wasn't always destined to be the drink of choice. Historian William Rohrbarg notes that domestic whiskey originally was a Revolutionary wartime substitute. As settlers pushed westward, vast tracts of land and surplus corn created a storage problem. Corn would rot if left in the field. The solution? Whiskey. Distilling maize into liquor preserved wealth that couldn't otherwise be sold. But corn-based whiskey wasn't like the barley or rye of Europe. It required small batch stills and careful attention to prevent scorching. Whiskey wasn't just a drink, it was a lifeline. Journalist Patrick Kiger points out that whiskey generated so much income that when the new nation struggled under the weight of Revolutionary War debt, Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton proposed a tax on domestic liquor. But to small farmers and distillers in western Pennsylvania, whiskey was survival. They refused to pay, tarring and feathering tax collectors, seizing records, and taking up arms in what became known as the Whiskey Rebellion. It was the first major crisis of the constitutional republic. Washington tried reasoning with the farmers. When that failed, he did what he had once revolted against King George for, raising a militia of 13,000 men and arresting 150 rebels. The confrontation set a precedent for the tension between federal power and states' rights, and it revealed just how different life on the western frontier was from the east. Federal red tape over Indian removal, commercial development, and land rights left many Westerners convinced that Washington wasn't acting in their best interests. The vast distance from the capital only reinforced the idea that forming a government independent of Washington might be wiser. Secessionist thoughts weren't seen as shameful. They were considered a legitimate way to protect the Republican form of government. Remember, the U.S. Constitution had been in effect for just 12 years when Jefferson took office in 1800. The founders, inspired by ancient philosophy, believed a republic could only thrive in a small or medium-sized state. As America expanded, growing too large for its government became a real concern. Historian David Stewart explains, the remaining Indians could be hostile. The whites were just as scary. Cutthroats lurked on trails, ready to separate the weak from their valuables or their lives. Whiskey flowed freely, often the only medicine or comfort available. Drinking could start at noon and last well into the evening. On the frontier, class distinctions blurred, equality reigned, and survival often depended on grit, as well as a stiff drink. A traveler in 1804 described the residents of Mississippi Territory as illiterate, wild and savage, of depraved morals. A Virginia politician went so far as to call Kentucky Virginia's Botany Bay, a nod to the Australian penal colony settled by British convicts. And in this world, Aaron Burr thrived. The duel with Alexander Hamilton may have changed everything, but the frontier was a place where ambition, danger, and whiskey intertwined. Burr had survived murder charges in 2 states, been dropped from the presidential ticket, rejected by New York voters, and watched creditors circle as his land speculation ventures collapsed. Still, he refused to give up. Stewart writes, Burr did not grow gloomy or sink into self-criticism. Rather, this matter-of-fact man resolutely dreamt of still doing great things. Burr believed at his core that he had not deserved ill treatment from Jefferson, the Clintons, or Hamilton, and now he was wronged again by the jackals who pursued him. Burr resolved to rise again. And in the harsh, whiskey-fueled frontier, he could start plotting his next move. You're listening to Empires, Anarchy, and Other Notable Moments, a podcast designed for deep dives that assist in the teaching of history. This series focuses upon America's fallen founder, Aaron Burr. Episode number 4, The Burr Conspiracy. The title of this episode comes from the most commonly cited explanation for the chaos that unfolded between 1804 and Burr's treason trial in 1807. We know a lot, but the word conspiracy still fits, because no one knows exactly what Aaron Burr was planning. Part of the uncertainty comes from the shady characters involved, men who double-crossed each other as a matter of course. Burr's daughter, Theodosia, was told the plan was to buy up huge tracts of Indian land. Andrew Jackson was told that they were preparing to aid the U.S. in a war with Mexico. Some whispers pointed to Spanish Florida as the target. Investors were convinced Burr wanted to carve out an independent nation along the Mississippi River, or maybe somewhere in the newly acquired Louisiana Purchase. British officials were told Burr planned to march at the head of an army to assassinate President Thomas Jefferson. The details are so murky that estimates of his army size range from 40 to 7,000. His own lawyer summed it up wittily. We have had 2 insurrections in Pennsylvania, the Whiskey Rebellion and the Hot Water Insurrection. If I were to name this, I would call it the will-o'-the-wisp treason. For though it is said to be here, there, and everywhere, yet it is nowhere. That description, here, there, and everywhere, fits Burr's movements after he felled Hamilton. The fugitive slipped out of New York, briefly stayed in Philadelphia, and then wrapped up his duties in Washington as the sitting Vice President of the United States. It was a journey that likely required no small amount of whiskey to steel his nerves. When dealing with a conspiracy, it's important to establish a clear timeline. In March 1804, Burr was dropped from the Republican ticket in favor of George Clinton. A month later, he lost the New York governorship. 2 months after that, he learned of Hamilton's comment that Burr was a, quote, dangerous man. It wasn't the worst thing Hamilton had said, but it triggered the July 11th duel that would set the wheels of the so-called Burr conspiracy in motion. In just 4 months, Aaron Burr had gone from being one heartbeat from the presidency to a wanted criminal on the run. Burr resumed his Washington duties in August, but spent much of the summer recess in self-doubt. By November and December, he returned to full-time service during the lame duck session of the 8th Congress. John Adams once called the vice presidency the most insignificant office ever conceived by man. That sentiment was shared by many who held the office, most of whose names are long forgotten today. Adams had sidelined his own vice president, Thomas Jefferson, but that could be excused as they were political opponents. Burr's experience was different. He had been selected by Jefferson to balance the ticket with a Northern Republican. Yet once in office, Jefferson elevated Southern farmers over the manufacturing-heavy North. Out-of-power Federalists even approached Burr early in the administration to see if he would lead a secession movement. Their fear of a Virginian cabal would prove accurate. Jefferson's successors, Madison and Monroe, cemented the Democratic Republicans as the dominant force in D.C. At the time, the vice presidency was tied more to the legislative branch than the executive. The VP served as president of the Senate, presiding over its sessions every day it was in session. Burr was respected for his fairness and efficiency. But in August 1804, the Senate had little pressing work. Instead, the body was consumed by the impeachment trial of Justice Samuel Chase. Politics today are stiff and boring, leading many lawmakers to liven up their experience with a drink or two. In an interesting attempt to defend Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Senator Mark Wayne Mullen asked an assembled congressional hearing, "How many senators do you know that have shown up to a vote drunk?" And during the pandemic, Connecticut Speaker of the House warned his own party members to stop drinking in the parking garage while the House was in session. In my own visits to legislative state houses, I am regularly stunned at how many individuals aren't paying any attention to the speakers who are at the podium, hoping to influence their fellow representatives to vote with them. Today, political speeches are less about persuasion and more about performance. On the surface, Senator Cory Booker's incredible feat at setting a new filibuster record looked like a love letter to principle. But a study published in the Public Library of Science found something more sobering: a direct link between floor speeches and campaign fundraising. In fact, 6 fundraising messages went out during the 25 hours Booker spent denouncing what he called the blatant criminal activity of the second Trump administration. Today, the real work of politics doesn't happen at the podium. It happens in the halls and back rooms of the Capitol. Campaign managers and party whips are far more likely to sway a vote than any soaring speech on the Senate floor. And because votes are calculated so precisely, the vice president only shows up when there's a tie to break. How often that happens depends on the balance of power. Joe Biden never cast a single tie-breaking vote in his 8 years as VP, while Kamala Harris set the record with 33 in just 4 years. Today's votes are measured out with the precision of a bartender pouring a neat shot. But in Burr's time, the politics of the Senate were more like a tavern brawl, messy, loud, and always in need of someone to keep order. Back then, the vice president wasn't a rare guest in the chamber. He was there every single day the Senate was in session, presiding over the proceedings. By all accounts, Aaron Burr took that responsibility seriously, earning respect for the way he kept the chamber running smoothly. Still, there wasn't much in the way of legislation waiting on his return to Washington. Instead, the Senate was consumed by a single spectacle: the impeachment trial of Justice Samuel Chase. The judicial branch was designed to be above politics. But as history has shown, politics always find a way to spike the punch bowl. Jefferson's so-called Revolution of 1800 marked the first real transfer of power in American history. John Adams, a Federalist, was handing the presidency to his fiercest rival, Thomas Jefferson. In the lame duck stretch of his administration, Adams pushed through the Judiciary Act and rushed to fill the courts with loyal Federalist judges. These last-minute moves were so frantic they became infamous as the midnight appointments. Adams hoped his new judges would bottle up Jefferson's agenda, but the scheme backfired. When Jefferson's Secretary of State, James Madison, refused to deliver William Marbury's commission, the fight landed in the Supreme Court. The result was the landmark case Marbury v. Madison, which established judicial review, the court's authority to decide whether laws or executive actions are constitutional. In practice, it handed the judiciary a shot glass full of nearly unlimited power, checked only by the rare and messy process of impeachment. Jefferson bristled at this new reality, complaining that his political enemies have retired into the judiciary as a stronghold from which all the works of republicanism are to be beaten down and erased. In addition to being a signer of the Declaration of Independence, Justice Samuel Chase was a fiery Federalist judge, accused of letting politics seep into his classroom. Critics charged that he refused to dismiss biased jurors and limited defense witnesses in 2 high-profile trials. The U.S. Senate's own record of the proceedings notes that the final article of impeachment accused the justice of continually promoting his political agenda on the bench. thereby tending to prostitute the high judicial character with which he was invested, to the low purpose of an electioneering partisan. That sharp language reveals just how seriously Jefferson's Democratic Republicans took the matter. Yet for all their zeal, they lacked an ally in the man presiding over the trial, the sitting vice president, Aaron Burr, whom they had already cast aside. Burr threw himself into the role. That shouldn't have been surprising. He had always taken his Senate duties seriously. But now, with his reputation shot and his enemies circling, Burr had every reason to keep things scrupulously above board. He still carried outstanding warrants in 2 states, and now, only months after killing Alexander Hamilton, he was overseeing the fate of one of the Federalists' most prominent judges. A Philadelphia paper captured the unease of the moment, warning that hands stained with the best blood of our nation should not be sacrilegiously laid upon the judges of the land. Yet Burr's handling of the trial was, by all accounts, unimpeachable. He personally questioned witnesses, pushed his colleagues to sit for more than 5 hours each day, and even reprimanded one senator for eating cake during deliberations. As historian David Stewart notes, by insisting on regular and sober proceedings, Burr created an environment in which the politically motivated charges against Chase seemed small, even frivolous. The result? The Senate acquitted Chase by comfortable margins. Over the course of that month-long trial, Burr also checked 3 major boxes. First, in his constitutional duty, he read aloud and confirmed the election results of 1804, an announcement that included his own replacement, George Clinton. Second, he quietly maneuvered to lessen the sting of his duel with Hamilton. Burr himself escaped legal punishment, but both men's seconds were stripped of their voting rights for 20 years. And third, while running a trial in daylight, he began secret meetings in the shadows with General James Wilkinson, a man whose taste for intrigue was as strong as any frontier whiskey. At the turn of the 19th century, Washington was more small town than capital. The city itself was the product of a backroom deal between Jefferson and Hamilton, a compromise of location, proximity, and power, all made in the room where it happens. To its earliest inhabitants, though, it was less a shining beacon than a swamp. One called it an abomination of desolation. Barely 4,000 people lived there, spread across 700 buildings. Only 2 homes were large enough for social gatherings, and even those were described as third-rate by architect Benjamin Latrobe. The British minister complained that his lodgings were nothing more than mere shells, with bare walls and without fixtures of any kind, even without a pump or well. The Capitol stood unfinished. The president's mansion was little more than that, a mansion not yet the White House. Republicans tolerated Burr, but Federalists shunned him, and so, lacking party invitations, the vice president found plenty of time to meet privately with General James Wilkinson. The general's reputation preceded him. A Revolutionary War veteran who had served under Benedict Arnold at Quebec, he went on to build a fortune in Kentucky and help negotiate with Spain for access to New Orleans, a deal that kept Kentucky corn flowing downriver. Without it, settlers' whiskey stills would have gone dry. That act alone made him wildly popular on the frontier, and when Mad Anthony Wayne died in 1796, Wilkinson became the senior-most officer in the U.S. Army. Jefferson later trusted him to keep order in New Orleans after the Louisiana Purchase. But Wilkinson carried secrets heavier than any musket. Behind his polished uniform, he was Agent 13, a paid spy for Spain. Historian Andrew Linklater calls him the most notorious American traitor you've probably never heard of, and Teddy Roosevelt would later dismiss him as the most despicable character in American history. He leaked troop movements, fort locations, even plans to court native alliances. He went so far as to reveal the supposed whereabouts of Lewis and Clark. Spain dispatched a team to kill the explorers, though the assassins never found them. Most of the information that he passed on related to the fractures in our early republic. Federalists versus anti-federalists, Western secessionists, and economic disgruntlement were all topics that Spain were eager to exploit. Spain's holdings in North America were far better off if the United States remained divided internally. So when rumors spread that the indicted Vice President of the United States might be plotting something in the West, Wilkinson was all ears. In Kentucky, Burr was even encouraged to run for Congress, where locals thought killing Hamilton would actually boost his popularity. But David Stewart reminds us that his interest was far more ambitious than winning a seat in Congress. Only days after leaving the second highest office in the Republic, Burr plunged into talk of insurrection and secession. The former vice president sought help abroad. He offered Britain trade rights in exchange for money and a few frigates to pry Louisiana loose from Jefferson's America. He then traveled west, meeting with influential frontiersmen, all while Jefferson barely stirred. With overwhelming Democratic-Republican control in Congress, Jefferson governed lightly, preferring what he called less government. That laid-back style left space for the Burr conspiracy to grow in plain sight. And yet some whispered Jefferson allowed it. After all, it was Jefferson who once wrote that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. In Burr, he may have seen both. The president was in a comfortable position. His faction had an absurd margin in both chambers of Congress, controlling 114 seats in the House against just 28 Federalists, and a 26-8 margin in the Senate. His governing philosophy involved the federal government doing far less, and thus his 8 years of governance felt unobtrusive. The laid-back, easy-going nature of the Jefferson administration allowed the Burr conspiracy to go farther than it ought to have, considering that most of it was all planned out in the open. Jefferson's allies, the French, were the first to sound the alarm. The French minister personally warned the president, writing that Mr. Burr's career is generally looked upon as finished, but he would rather sacrifice the interests of his country than renounce celebrity and fortune. Louisiana would be the theater of Mr. Burr's new intrigues. He is going there under the patronage of General Wilkinson. I am not the only person who thinks that the assemblage of such men in a country already discontented is enough to give rise to serious troubles there. Burr's first stop on his publicized Western tour brought him to Blenderhassett Island on the Ohio River. Its owners, wealthy Irish expatriates, had dreamed of building a new Eden there. According to Jefferson's lawyers, it was here that Burr bit the forbidden fruit. The island mansion became his base of operations as he roamed the frontier in search of allies, men with money, influence, or weapons. But Burr rarely spoke plainly. Instead of unveiling a grand plan, he tailored his pitch to the frustrations of each audience. To some, he spoke of the West being overtaxed and underrepresented. To others, he floated the idea that the capital should be closer to the center of the nation, perhaps Louisville. And when the mood suited, he spoke of taking Spanish Florida and Texas by force. Wherever Burr went, rumors followed. Historian David Stewart tells us that after meeting with Burr in Cincinnati, the county sheriff began predicting the nation would divide along the line of the Appalachian Mountains. With its capital in Cincinnati, he said, a new Western empire would send 500 men to conquer Mexico. The tale of Burr's scheme grew stronger and more intoxicating with every retelling. In New Orleans, General Wilkinson prepared the stage. Jefferson had appointed him military commander of the city, and his stepson had secured a post as a local judge. Burr began meeting with members of the so-called Mexican Association, white Americans who longed to free Mexico from Spain. Burr claimed he could muster 8,000 militia from Louisiana, 10,000 from Kentucky, and another 8,000 made up of soldiers and enslaved men promised freedom in exchange for service. When he finally left New Orleans, Burr vanished into the dense woods of the South. Most travelers took the river north or chartered ships to Charleston or Baltimore. Burr, for reasons we'll never know, trudged inland instead. Perhaps he wanted to avoid prying eyes on the coast. Or maybe he simply wanted to see the land he hoped would one day be his. Either way, he spent months hacking through forests on his way back to Blenderhassett Island. By the time he arrived, the newspapers had caught wind of his plot. Philadelphia's pro-federalist United States Gazette asked its readers, "How long will it be before we hear of Colonel Burr at the head of a revolutionary party on the western waters? When will New Orleans and the Mississippi be in his hands? How soon before he engages in the reduction of Mexico?" The questions were enough to cause Britain, which Burr had courted, to back away from the scheme. Their minister reported to London that Burr's object has now begun to be noticed in the public prints. It may be so far advanced as to render further secrecy impossible. The loss of British support was the first crack in Burr's plan. The second and fatal crack came from Wilkinson. Burr surely knew Wilkinson's reputation as a slippery eel. Rumors of his Spanish connections circulated freely in New Orleans, but great conspiracies are rarely built by saints. Burr needed him. Some historians even suggest Burr meant to blackmail Wilkinson into loyalty with the evidence he had gathered. The truth is, Wilkinson was always a traitor in search of the best payout. By 1804, he had been spying for Spain for nearly 2 decades. Yet he hesitated to alert them about Burr's scheme. If Burr succeeded, Wilkinson could pose as the conquering hero who brought Florida or Texas into the Union, a path that later led Andrew Jackson and Zachary Taylor to the presidency. And if Burr failed, Wilkinson could betray him to Jefferson, to Spain, or to both, emerging once again as the hero who quote-unquote saved the Republic. The two ringleaders couldn't even agree on a timetable. Wilkinson thought they needed 18 months. Burr, ever impatient, insisted he'd be leading an army in 8. All the while, the double agent happily funneled details of the scheme to his Spanish handlers. When pressed, Burr and Wilkinson cloaked their plans under the respectable label of a filibuster. Today, the word calls to mind endless Senate speeches. But in the early 1800s, it meant something quite different. Private American citizens launching unauthorized invasions of foreign nations. Richard Montgomery had done it in 1775, when he marched into Canada without a declaration of war. Hamilton toyed with the idea of liberating South America in 1798. And now Burr, standing on the shoulders of rebels, plotted invasions of West Florida or Texas. If he pulled it off, Jefferson could hardly denounce him. Congress would simply ratify events after the fact, and Burr's name would be cleared. The the scale of the rumors only grew. Many Americans assumed Burr's Western scheme was the real reason Jefferson had pushed him off the Republican ticket. Historian Nancy Eisenberg writes that the administration itself expected Spanish America to fall eventually. Expansion, she explains, was seen as a natural force. Madison even described Spain as too weak to resist, likening her to a woman with borders so porous that private settlers would inevitably press forward. In other words, Washington didn't encourage invasion outright, but it hardly discouraged it either. The historian notes that the administration assumed that the conquest of Spanish America was inevitable. American expansion was a natural force. Private settlement was thought to represent the catalyst by which Madrid would feel obligated to cede its territory. As Monroe explained in 1803 to Charles Pinckney, the American minister to Spain, that country could do little to curtail the growing power of this country and the direction of it against her possessions within its reach. Without calling directly for invasion, Washington was all but giving the green light to private citizens who were contemplating transgressing those borders. Things began to go off the rails, however, when Spain realized Burr's activities might be aimed at them. Unaware that a double agent was in their midst, Burr sent Jonathan Dayton to keep the Spanish unaware of his potential filibuster. In a spectacular case of overthinking, Dayton told the Spanish that Burr planned a coup d'etat against Jefferson. For this juicy tidbit, he demanded $40,000 up front. The Spaniards, already holding Wilkinson as their paid informant, were unimpressed, resulting in Dayton pocketing just $2,500. Although we don't know the truth, Eisenberg believes that it was a calculated effort to knock the Spanish off balance. It made them less certain about their original suspicions, and thus more vulnerable to Burr's real agenda, a surprise attack against Mexico, when the time was right. One Spanish official described the wild plan Dayton sketched out as almost insane, yet easy to execute. Historian David Stewart summarizes the plot for us, stating that Burr would smuggle armed men in plain clothes into Washington City. At a signal, they'd seize the president, the vice president, and the Senate's presiding officer. They'd empty the banks, torch most of the Navy, and sail away on the best ships. From New Orleans, they would declare an independent Western nation. This new information, complete with a detailed plan of attack, however, caused the Spaniards to put Agent 13 on notice that they were aware that he wasn't passing along everything. Burr's attempts to create a fake double agent had accidentally exposed his real one. Meanwhile, Burr pressed forward. On credit, he purchased 350,000 acres near Natchez, land bordering Spanish Texas. If Mexico fell, that land would be worth a fortune. Still, whispers about his darker ambitions were spreading. William Eaton, a veteran of America's war against the Barbary pirates, came to Blenderhassett Island expecting adventure. What he heard shocked him. Burr spoke of conquering Mexico, yes, but also of marching on Washington, throwing Congress neck and heels out the door, assassinating the president, seizing the treasury, and declaring himself protector of a new, energetic government. Mexico was one thing. Betraying his own country was too much. Eden carried the warning to two congressmen, both of whom brushed him off. He then proceeded to go straight to the president himself. Jefferson listened politely but dismissed the threat, believing Eaton was just trying to maneuver Burr back into government service. Even so, smoke was building. Jefferson received two anonymous letters warning him against Burr, one claiming that while Burr spoke publicly of Mexico, his true target was nothing less than the destruction of our government. And in the middle of that gathering storm, Burr made his most audacious move yet, arranging a meeting with the President of the United States. Stewart tells us that Burr began the meeting by reminding Jefferson of a comment the president had made after the election of 1800, that if Burr hadn't been vice president, Jefferson would have placed him in a high office. Now, Burr pointed out, he would welcome such an appointment. Insisting he had never asked a favor before, the former vice president noted that Jefferson had always used him with politeness, but nothing more, despite Burr's support for the administration. He added that he could do Jefferson much harm. The threat was unmistakable, and the president had his full attention. Privately, Jefferson suspected Burr's complaints were more about a lawsuit stemming from the disputed 1800 election. Despite his boldness, Burr was forced to delay his expedition by 6 months due to a lack of funds. It became clear that he was wavering. He even wrote to a friend about a possible appointment to Pennsylvania's Supreme Court. Hardly the behavior of a man plotting to decapitate the U.S. government and declare himself Lord Ruler. Stewart observes that during this period, Burr's efforts resembled the path of a pinball through an arcade machine more than the tightly focused advance of successful revolutionaries and military leaders. The common thread was a desperate quest to redeem his reputation. Then the press got wind of the story. A Federalist paper in Kentucky published explosive articles exposing General Wilkinson as a double agent, and later revealed the details of Burr's scheme. Fights broke out across the country along political fault lines. With the president still ignoring the threat, Joseph Hamilton Davies, a U.S. District Attorney for Kentucky, took matters into his own hands. He planted a fake story in a newspaper claiming that Jefferson had fired him for his Federalist connections. Believable enough, given Jefferson's attacks on Federalist judges and Davis's kinship with Chief Justice John Marshall. Posing as a man with an axe to grind, Davies gathered ironclad proof that General Wilkinson was a traitor working with Burr to raise a private army in order to spark war with Spain. Even with evidence in hand, Jefferson continued to hesitate. By 1806, Burr had pushed preparations into overdrive. He commissioned enough ships to transport an army a third the size of Washington's forces. Unaware of the dangerous double game that was being played, Andrew Jackson, then a senator from Tennessee, pledged that the state militia would march at a moment's notice. In a masterstroke of political theater, Jackson also wrote to Jefferson, confirming that 3 regiments were ready, showcasing how completely unaware he was of Burr's broader ambitions. It was General James Wilkinson that finally decided to put an end to the scheme. Upon receiving a letter from Burr which proclaimed that the gods invite us to glory and fortune, it remains to be seen whether we deserve the boons. The double agent decided to double-cross his co-conspirator. Stewart provides some insight into the general's thinking, writing that Wilkinson faced a pivotal decision. This was the movement. For Burr, the scheming of the last 2 years had not been empty talk. Burr was on the march. He intended to raise an insurrection in New Orleans to invade Mexico and West Florida, to proclaim a new nation, and to invite the West to join him. The stakes were higher than Wilkinson had ever played for. He had grown comfortable with backroom disloyalty that loosened cash from the hapless Spaniards. But this? Revolution, war, treason in the light of day? It was very different. It would all be so open, so daring. He would be attacking Spain, his longtime sponsor, without the approval of his own government. As a co-conspirator, Wilkinson couldn't openly betray the vice president. Instead, he doctored a ciphered letter outlining their plans, erasing any trace of his own involvement before sending it on to Jefferson. He then secured peace along the Spanish border, freeing himself to focus on the more immediate threat. 7,000 men led by the former vice president moving down the Mississippi River towards New Orleans. At last, Jefferson saw the writing on the wall. Governors were ordered to arrest Burr the moment he acted improperly, and John Graham was dispatched to doggedly follow and report on his every move. When it wants to, the squeaky wheels of government can move fast. Blenderhassett Island was raided. In Kentucky, Davies received a grand jury warrant to stop the former vice president. Newspapers splashed the story nationwide. Burr, ever the showman, appeared at the Kentucky State House to address the charges head-on. The key government witness failed to appear, and Burr was cleared by a subsequent grand jury. He would later proclaim his innocence in what was essentially a political witch hunt by the Jefferson administration. Undeterred, Burr pressed on with a fraction of the forces he had envisioned, taking 60 to 80 men and a few ships down the river towards New Orleans to meet Wilkinson. Unbeknownst to him, the general had already pledged full cooperation with Jefferson to stop the plot, even at personal risk. Burr only realized the betrayal when he reached Memphis. Stewart notes that Burr didn't have enough men to fight. He had nowhere to run. He would have to talk his way out. He appeared in a Mississippi territorial court, posted bond, and again successfully defended himself, but was ordered not to leave the territory. When new charges arose a month later, Burr failed to appear, becoming a fugitive once more, this time hunted by agents of Wilkinson who wanted to silence him before the vice president could expose the general's role in the scheme. And so our fallen founder vanished into the frontier, leaving a trail of rumors, political tension, and unfinished plans. The next episode will follow Burr on the run and into the courtroom for what would become the nation's first high-profile trial of the century, pitting him directly against Thomas Jefferson. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to interact with the show, you can email us at resourcesbylowery@gmail.com or find us on Bluesky beneath the handle EmpiresPod. If you would like to financially support the show, please look in the description for more information. As always, thank you for listening, rating the show, and spreading the word.